The Life of Reason, George Santayana, 1863 to 1952. A work in the philosophy of history and in metaphysics, first published 1905-1906. Reason in Common Sense. The main ideas in this work are that the philosophy of history is an interpretation of man's past in the light of his ideal development. The life of reason, which gives meaning to history, is the unity given to existence by a mind in love with the good. By the use of reason, man distinguishes between spirit and nature and comes to understand his own wants and how to satisfy them. Instinct, which originally showed itself only in animal impulses, takes on ideal dimensions and leads man into service for society and God. And finally, in art, which is the imposing of form on matter, but most of all in science, which puts the claims of reason to the test of fact, the life of reason reaches its ideal consummation. In his autobiography, Santayana says that the life of reason had its origin in a course which he gave at Harvard University entitled Philosophy of History. It drew heavily from Plato and Aristotle, but also from Francis Bacon, John Locke, Montesquieu, and Hippolyte Taine. And we could also add Schopenhauer, who was the subject of Santayana's PhD dissertation, and his Professor William James, whose biological-oriented psychology left a strong impression on Santayana. For Santayana, the philosophy of history implies no providential plan of creation or redemption, but is simply retrospective politics. That is to say, an interpretation of man's past in the light of his ideal development. It is the science of history which deals with events inferred from evidence and explained in terms of causal law. But not content with the mere knowledge of what has happened, man has a strong propensity toward trying to find meaning in events as if history were shaped to some human purpose. Admittedly, it is not. Still, the exercise is profitable, for it is one of the ways in which we discover what goals we wish to pursue in the future. The failures and successes of our forebears, as their acts will appear when measured by our ideals, can help us to appraise our standards, as well as to enlighten us with respect to how far they can be attained. But it can serve its function only if we remember that its ideal history, an abstract from reality made to illustrate a chosen theme, rather than a description of actual tendencies observable in the world. The theme which Santayana selects as giving meaning to history is the rise and development of reason. Unlike his idealistic counterparts, who think of nature as the product and embodiment of reason, he conceives reason as a latecomer on the evolutionary scene and very much dependent upon what has gone before. This is not to say that there is no order in nature prior to the dawn of consciousness in man. Santayana's contention, on the contrary, is that reason, which is too often thought of in the abstract, schoolmastery fashion, is in reality an extension of the order already achieved in organized matter. In its earliest phase, it is nothing more than instinct, which has grown conscious of its purposes and representative of its conditions. For in the dark laboratories of nature, life has already solved the hardest problems, leaving to its strange child, reason, nothing to do at first but amuse itself with the images which drift through the mind while the body goes about its accustomed business. We can scarcely call it reason until, distinguishing these mental states from objects, reason gradually sees what the parent organism is about, what it runs from, what it pursues, and how it manages each new eventuality. Then it begins to play its role. Where instinct is dependent on present cues, reason can summon thoughts from afar, suggest shortcuts, and balance likelihoods. Often its well-meant suggestions lead to destruction, but on the other hand, its occasionally fruitful counsels tend to perpetuate themselves in habits and customs. As a shelter of branches which, derived for one night's protection, remains standing and becomes a rudimentary home. It is in this way that reason, an adjunct of life, comes to have a life of its own. Reason, by this accounting, is the servant of will or interest. It is these that determine what is good. Santayana calls the life of reason the unity inherent in all existence. Santayana traces reason's career through 5 phases. He devotes 1 book to each. First phase, reason in common sense. Reason in common sense may be regarded as introducing the other books. It outlines the origins of the 2 realms, nature and spirit, whose fortunes are followed through the rest of the work. Out of an originally chaotic experience, man learns to distinguish first the stable, predictable realm of nature. Regularity and order are present there, and things occurring repeatedly can be identified and their habits noted. But in a greater part of experience, images come and go in no discernible pattern and combine in innumerable ways. The remainder we come to designate as spirit. It is the seat of poetry and dreams, and later of philosophy and mathematics. Human progress may be viewed as the gradual untangling of these 2 realms. The rich garment of sight and sound under which nature appears to our senses conceals its structure and beguiles man into supposing that trees and rivers have spirits and pursue purposes not unlike our own. Not unlike his own, I should say. It is, or her own, yes. It is practical experience, fishing and agriculture say, that gradually teaches him or her otherwise, enabling him or her to strip off irrelevant qualities and discern the mechanical process underneath. Not surprisingly, he or she is sometimes reluctant to leave behind the more congenial picture of poetry and myth, but insofar as he or she becomes aware of this advantage, he or she learns to prefer things to ideas, and to subordinate thinking to the arts of living. Almost as difficult as discerning nature is the task of deciding what is good. Before consciousness awakened, instinct guided the body toward the satisfaction of genuine, if partial, needs. But when ideas appeared, impulse was diverted and moral perplexity began. False gods arose, which exist only in imagination, and these must be set aside in favour of ideas which live up to their promises. And there is the further problem of subordinating the claims of competing goods under a common ideal. Reason has not to go beyond human nature to discover the truth and order of values. By understanding man's wants and the limits of his existence, it points him towards his highest fulfillment, that is, his or her happiness, than which he or she has no other end. Viewed in these large aspects of rational life is sanity, maturity, common sense. It justifies itself against romanticism, mysticism, and all other worldliness which betoken a failure to distinguish between ideal and real, or a misguided flight from nature to the world of dreams.